Hey there and welcome back to NBA 2K17. My name is Pete and today we complete the first year of NBA 2K17's MyGM or MyLeague mode with the Houston Rockets. The Rockets are without a doubt the team of James Harden. He is by far your best player and you should continue to build around him. The Rockets have done that almost to perfection over the last few seasons and it is your job to continue along those lines. Harden is locked down for at least the next 3 years, so we have plenty of time to upgrade the team around him. Speaking of the surrounding cast, let's have a look at the rest of the starters. Patrick Beverley starts alongside Harden at the point guard, but the Rockets are actually playing Harden at the point guard from time to time, so feel free to experiment with that as well. Your starting small forward is going to be Trevor Ariza, a nice 3-and-D player with the length to guard bigger forwards as well. Now, the power forward and center spots offer a bit more flexibility. At the power forward, you will likely start with Ryan Anderson, who is a great outside shooter and a solid rebounder, however, his defensive game is lacking a bit. At the center, your go-to option is 22-year-old Clint Capella, one of the more promising big men in the league. If you want more rim protection at the power forward, you can switch Capella to that position and start Nenê at the center, but keep in mind that Nenê is 35 years old and pretty injury prone. Now let's have a look at the bench next, and the point guard spot is probably the one that lacks depth the most on Houston's bench. Both Tyler Ennis and Bobby Brown should not see significant NBA minutes on a team of Houston's caliber, and while Ennis has the age factor on his side, he is a pretty slow player for a point guard. Keep in mind that Harden could play significant minutes here, so this is not as huge of a problem as it sounds. The backup shooting guard spot goes to Eric Gordon, who had his injury problems in New Orleans but fits in nicely behind or next to Harden as a sharpshooter. KJ McDaniels is there to fill a roster spot but should not get minutes at either the 2 or the 3. Off the bench at the small forward, you have the choice between Sam Dekker and Corey Brewer, both similarly rated but very different players. Brewer is 8 years older than Dekker and a solid defender who lacks offense. Dekker, on the other hand, is only 22 and more of an offensive-minded player. He can also switch over to the power forward, so you could in theory give minutes to both. That would however cause a conflict with the interests of Montrezl Harrell, who is an up-and-coming but a bit undersized big man. He will demand minutes, and rightfully so. Capella and Harrell have the potential to form a great frontcourt for the next years, so you should definitely bring Harrell off the bench at the 4. Or even start him if you don't like Anderson there. With Onuaku and Wiltshire, the Rockets have 2 more young players at the power forward, however they are not that promising and will only clutter your rotation if given minutes. The backup center then will likely be Nenê unless, as I mentioned earlier, you start him and move Capella to the 4. Then however you would have no backup center apart from Montrezl Harrell. Let's have a look at who comes off the books in Houston next. Not a lot of players on the Rockets are on expiring contracts, and those who are nothing to worry too much about. Yes, Nenê is expiring and that leaves you with a hole at the center, but he's getting old and you should be looking for a replacement soon anyway. Bobby Brown expires too, but he is the 3rd or even 4th option at the point guard and also already in his 30s. His loss won't hurt, so we can safely let him leave or trade him away. Now, the Rockets have a few team options coming up on their young players, specifically on Capella, Dekker, Ennis, McDaniels and Wiltshire. At least Capella and Dekker are no-brainers in my opinion, the rest is more or less up to you. A quick look at draft picks next, and 2017 will be an interesting draft year for the Rockets as they have 3 picks in total. Apart from that, the Rockets have all of their picks up until 2020, except for the 2019 second rounder. And last but not least, the cap space situation. The Rockets have a tiny amount of cap space this season, which honestly does not give them much flexibility. Much more interesting are $11.5 million in cap space next season, team options not included of course. If you were to accept all team options, then your cap space would be pretty much absorbed by that. If however you only take the ones of Capella and Dekker for example, you would still have a nice amount left to play with. And now, as usual, before we make any moves, here are your 3 key questions that need to be answered before going into year 1 with the Rockets. Number 1. What is your starting lineup going to look like? There are several choices to be made here. For example, you could start Beverley and Harden at the 1 and 2, or you could start Harden as the point guard with Gordon at the 2. The same thing applies down low. You can either go with Anderson and Capella and the game defaults you to that, but throwing Harrell or Nenê into the mix is also possible and depends largely on your playstyle. Question number 2. Do you really want to hold on to your first round draft pick? While the Rockets are currently playing incredibly well in real life, in 2K they are not guaranteed to land in one of the top spots in the Western Conference. Your first round pick will likely still fall outside of the lottery, and if you don't see a talent in a draft class that you can realistically acquire with a lower pick, then the first rounder could be a great trade asset. And question number 3, do you trade Nenê or let him walk in free agency? I think it is safe to say that it's probably for the best to have Nenê gone before the next season begins. That could either happen by simply letting his contract expire or by trading him to another team. Normally I would advise the trade, but his value is not too great despite his solid rating, and he might also be a good role player as long as he stays with the team. Now, one last thing, as usual, this series aims to be as realistic as possible, so a few players will not be considered when making trades. Trading them would result in pretty high-profile moves, and those tend to be a bit more on the unpredictable side. So in this video, I will not consider trades for Harden, Gordon, Capella, Ariza, Anderson, Beverley, Harrell, and Decker. And now let's get into it. Here are your 3 moves to make in year 1 in NBA 2K17's MyGM or MyLeague mode with the Houston Rockets. Move number 1, acquire a long-term backup guard. Now, I didn't say point guard or shooting guard because that depends largely on where you put Harden. However, even if Harden becomes a full-time point guard, you still only have 2 more serviceable players at the guard spots next to him in Beverley and Gordon. And should he stay at the 2 guard, you will need a better backup point guard because neither Ennis nor Brown are going to be much help. Brown also expires and Ennis could get better, but with a potential of only 71, his growth is somewhat limited. Now, next to the backup guard, you also have the need for a long-term backup center. However, the Rockets really only have the assets to make one good trade with their current first rounder. And yes, I decided to trade that because with the way 2K handles draft classes, you can almost always trade away a pick that lands outside of the lottery and profit from that. Also, point guard is a very top-heavy position in free agency, but then quickly declines to players in the low 70s who are often 30 or older. That means we will likely not be able to fill our need at this position in free agency. On the other hand, while the center likely has no real superstars entering free agency, there are a plethora of young guys in the mid-70s available. Just check out my Golden State Warriors video where we targeted them as well. So let us now package our first rounder together with one of the players we're trying to replace and see what we can grab. Trade targets include, for example, TJ McConnell from the Philadelphia 76ers. However, he probably gets mentioned in every single video that I make where I try to acquire a point guard, so I won't go for it, but just to let you know that he's available. Another option would be Tim Frazier from the Pelicans, or alternatively Langston Galloway, who however has a player option coming up. You could also buy into the Yogi Ferrell hype and grab him from Dallas, but keep in mind that he's going to be an unrestricted free agent once the season is over. Atlanta might offer Malcolm Delaney, who is certainly an upgrade over Ennis and Brown. However, he's already 27, so he will likely not improve that much. From Chicago, you might be able to grab Michael Carter-Williams or Jarian Grant, or you could go a bit more high profile and add a few second rounders to your first rounder and the player you want to get rid of, which would put you into territory where you could acquire a guy like Marcus Smart from Boston or DeJounte Murray from the Spurs. And I actually went with this slightly more high profile option and acquired the 20-year-old Murray for Ennis and 3 picks. Move number 2. Do not re-sign Nenê during the season. Now, only a few weeks into the season, Nenê is usually very willing to come back and even on a cheap deal. However, he should be equally willing to do the same in free agency, so there is no need to assign roughly $1 million to him now, when you can do the same once the season is over and you have a better overview of what your team needs. Keep in mind that you are likely going to hand out a few team options and you also need to sign free agents, so taking even a tiny amount of money away from next season's limited cap space could potentially hurt you in the long run. I would advise to simply let Nenê play through the season, see how he does, and then re-evaluate your need once the season is over. And now we can already simulate ahead to the offseason for move number 3. And that would be to accept the team options of Capella and Decker and then grab yourself a backup center in free agency. The rest of the players with team options next to Capella and Decker are severely overpriced here. If you desperately want them back, you can get them for much cheaper in regular free agency. And speaking of free agency, that's what we want to save our cap space for, as we are now going after a long-term backup big man. There are a ton of players available that you should be able to sign, for example Alex Len, Mo Spates, Mike Muscala, Salah Meshri, Jeff Withey, Spencer Hawes, Festus Ezeli, Tariq Black. The list goes on, and you will very likely find someone who fits your playstyle, and you should have enough cash left to sign them. Alternatively, you could simply bring back Nenê on a minimum deal if you liked his production in the past season. Keep in mind though that he's not going to get any better. And that's it. Unless Harden gets severely injured, you should be able to make the playoffs with ease. You might even be able to advance 1 or 2 rounds, but this team is not going to win a championship yet. With the moves that I have outlined here, you should still have a few roster spots available, so feel free to fill them however you like. Going into the next season, you hopefully have a pretty well balanced team, and you should be able to work your way up from there. As usual, let me know in the comments below how you would handle the Rockets in MyGM or MyLeague mode. Leave a thumbs up if you like this video, or if you want to support the channel, then click on subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.